I don't usually dream comics ideas, but that one was pretty fully formed in my dream. And I thought, whoa, that's very interesting. That needs to at least get drawn.
Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello, everyone. These are the Welcome to Geektown interviews. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. As this is the final part of one interview, and it'll be 2 weeks before the next episode, this is my last chance in June to shout out my patrons. Thank you, as always, to my supporters, which are Judd Winnick, Mike Sterling, Justin Bailey, Lily and Sam Breen, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Carla Hoffman, Julio Herrera, and Matthew Saint. If you'd like to join that club, it's just $1 per month, and that gets you access to unedited versions of these interviews and additional audio and scripts from the written episodes of the show. As I referenced earlier, this week we wrap up my interview with cartoonist Dana Simpson. This last section gets the most personal, as we discuss Dana's gender transition journey and some theories about why trans women are called out in both pop culture and the media more often than trans men. But we start the conversation, as we often do, with comics, and Dana's plans to create a book chronicling her personal story and why that's been on the back burner for so long. In a couple of interviews I read, you've said you were working on your own illustrated work about your transition, but
Yes,
it's been a few years since you started talking about it, and I can't find any sign of it
it's
having come out.
been a full decade and it has not come out yet. It turns out it's hard to write about yourself. Harder than I anticipated. I assumed that I would be good at it because I had been making comics for a long time, and that didn't seem that different.
Yeah.
The way that that came about was it's something I've always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in like 2015 or something, like very early days of Phoebe, I was having lunch with some people from my syndicate, and I was maybe a couple glasses of wine in, and I was like, you know what I've always wanted to do? I think I pitched it as the trans Persepolis. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
if yeah, for those who don't know, that's a graphic novel by Marjane Satrapi about her childhood in revolutionary Iran. And I was like, I'm gonna write that, but for being trans. And they were like, okay, yeah, do that. And then they offered me a contract to do it. And I was like, oh, I guess now I have to. I like it, this has to move from being something I talk about doing someday to a
Right.
real project that I'm
Yeah.
really supposed to work on. They have not given me a hard time about the fact that it's taken me now a full decade to hand this in. I've started over, depending how you count, 4 or 5 times. Each
Wow.
time I get a little closer. I have produced nearly finished drafts of it about 1.5 times, but it just wasn't really there. I felt like I didn't know exactly what and the other thing too is the landscape keeps changing. Like in 2015 when I started, trans people were still kind of this obscure cultural niche, and since then the media and cultural narrative about us kind of went from, huh, trans, what's that? To, hey, look, trans people, to, are there too many trans people? Our commenters debate, and none of them are trans. We're just going to debate them in their absence. So, what I wanted to say kept shifting.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But I finally did reach a point where I thought, okay, I understand this project now. And I've actually been hard at work on this now. And it's the next thing I'm going to finish. It's the next thing I'm going to hand in. What I came to realize was that I was telling the story of myself and my mother,
Hmm.
which I don't think I knew for the first at least 2 drafts. That, like, if there's a sequel, it'll be about me and my spouse and that relationship. But this one is about me and my mother and how, for my whole childhood, I was deeply unhappy, and mom could see that and was horrified by it because you want your kids to be happy. And she felt like there, when I came out to her, she said, there's a pain inside you that I never felt like I could touch. So I'm glad I have a name for it now. And my whole life up to then, it was sort of like I was saying how I felt in the language I had to say it, and she wasn't hearing me because there just wasn't the language to make her understand.
Yeah.
Or at least I didn't have access to it, and she didn't have access to it. And it's sort of the story of me reaching out and her trying to reach back, and it just never seeming to connect, and how that was for both of us, and then how that finally resolved when I finally put it to her in language that connected. And she was great. Like my mom was an amazing mom, an amazing ally. Like when I was in my 20s when I came out to her, and she immediately was like, okay, let's go shopping. Let me teach you makeup. She was like, here's all this stuff I would have taught you when you were 10 if I knew. And she's just the best. And it's the story of my mom being just the best, but also the story of how hard it was for me and how I always knew but didn't have the language to say. And she always wanted to help but didn't know how.
Yeah.
And once I understood that about it, it came together much more.
I really look forward to reading that. I love autobiographical comics.
Well,
I
another
just,
thing, yeah, another thing that happened too is just a lot of those have come out. And I've read many more of them now than I had when I proposed it, I read like, I don't know, Persepolis and Fun Home, maybe. And
okay.
now I've like read a bunch of stuff in that area of books, including stuff that came out much more recently. And so I feel like I understand the genre better. I also understand what other people have done and how to build on it without copying them.
Hmm.
I've spoken to a bunch of people who have written this kind of book about what their experience was like, and I feel like it's going to be a much better, much more kind of focused and polished book than if I'd just written one draft and handed it in 2016. And I'm grateful to my publisher for allowing me to take this long on it. They every once in a while they're like, just so you know, we still really believe in this book and we still want it, which I think is both literally the truth and also their way of saying, are you going to do this? Because we paid you money.
Poke, 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 poke. Still happening?
And I'm like, well, not that much money. I get way bigger advances than that now. And
So recently on Blue Sky, you returned to your earlier work and put out some new art featuring, as I mentioned way at the beginning, Ozzy and Milo,
that is
with
correct.
with the characters aging up a little and Milo having transitioned himself.
Yeah,
Now, from what I understand, originally this wasn't necessarily canon, but later you decided it was.
it
What was
became canon very quickly.
okay?
Yeah, it started as a dream I had. I had a dream in like late 2023 that I wrote some new Ozzy and Millie comics, but that Millie had transitioned and went by Milo.
Hmm.
I don't usually dream comics ideas, but that one was pretty fully formed in my dream. And I thought, whoa, that's very interesting. That needs to at least get drawn. And at the time I wasn't thinking this is the future direction for this comic necessarily, but I was intrigued by it, at least as a thought experiment.
Hmm.
And so I drew some art of it. And the reaction was very positive. Two different trans guys I'm friends with told me it brought them to tears because I mean, now these are friends who know the characters well, and also there's not that much trans guy representation. Like
Right.
when you see trans representation, it's like it's overwhelmingly us ladies. And so I think Millie being Milo is a very positive thing. And based on all of that, I thought, okay, this is something I really want to do. And the other thing about it was that it just felt like a natural resolution for that character, one that he hadn't had up to that point. And I thought about it and I realized, well, like I said earlier, that Ozzy and Millie is me working stuff out in my 20s, like you do in your 20s. Your 20s are just such a decade for figuring out who you are and where you're going.
Yep.
I mean, it's when I transitioned. It's when I honed my skills as a cartoonist too. And even though I didn't, when I started doing Ozzy and Millie, I didn't know I was going to end up transitioning. I don't know why I didn't know that. I feel like in the current cultural environment, I might have figured that out sooner. But I didn't know any trans people. I didn't think of it as a realistic thing that I could do. I thought I just sort of had to deal with it forever. But that's one reason Millie is who I'm just going to say who she is as a character. I mean, she's very angry at the world, obviously very deeply dissatisfied in a way that she can't fully express. So she kind of lashes out angrily because that's when you're a kid, and especially when you're a closeted trans kid, you don't have a lot of other options. I always thought of there's a John Mulaney joke about eggs that, that I think of where he's talking about being a kid and how nobody listens, nobody's interested. He's just like people would say, "What do you think you're doing?" But that just meant stop.
Stop.
And it'd be nice if somebody actually asked me that. What do you think you're doing? Well, thank you for asking. You know how I'm angry and horny all the time, and I have no outlet for it. So, eggs. And I always thought that was a very Millie bit. Even before Milo asserted himself, I always thought that, yeah, that's that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I was channeling all of that into Millie. So really, without meaning to, just by writing myself and writing from my own emotions, I accidentally wrote a trans kid. And if Millie was struggling with all of the same feelings I got to resolve that. So it stands to reason that the logical progression for Milo is for him to get to resolve that.
Yeah.
And something that was really nice about that was the positive reaction, the overwhelmingly positive reaction that I got online. Like almost no one objected. And people who did objected very softly. Like, sort of like, I don't love that because it changes a character that I have known for a long time and am very attached to. And it's like, yeah, I understand that. That's a reasonable reaction to have. There wasn't a whole lot of ew, gross, which I don't know what I expected, but it was very different than my experience coming out like almost 20 years earlier. Because when I came out, it was such a different universe. And everybody was like, trans, what's that? You made that up to get attention. And I got to see debates online about whether I'd gone crazy and whether my gender really counted or not in a way that nobody would do now.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was a very healing experience for me, seeing Milo get the welcome that he got. So, it's healing for him, and then it ended up being healing for me too. And I thought, okay, this is a story that is left to tell in that universe. And Sheena, my editor agent, encouraged me in that direction. She was like, if that's a book you want to write, I highly encourage it. So it's not the next thing I'm going to do. I've got a memoir and then another Phoebe book that I want to do first. And I'm also working on a book with my sister that we want to pitch. And it's sort of a superhero thing.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And I've never worked with her before, but she's a really great artist in kind of a way that's different from me. Like she's really good at action. She's an anime and manga fan, and she can do action and stuff. And my stuff is very static and talky, so it's like I think our skills will combine interestingly. But Ozzy and Milo is on my plate,
Okay.
and I wouldn't expect it this year, but it's coming.
Excellent. That answers actually the next two questions I was about to ask. So that's
I
perfect.
anticipated your question.
Now, obviously, you are not the representative for all trans people everywhere, but I am curious at something you mentioned earlier, and I'd like to get your take on it. In culture, both pop culture and the pundit sphere, there does seem to be a focus more on men transitioning to women than women transitioning to men. Do you have any thoughts as to why that is?
How long do you have?
I have all day. I have as much time as
Yeah,
you have.
I have some thoughts about that, and I kind of always have, because even before we were a major cultural debate, most of the focus was always on us. And my transition era therapist was an old trans man.
Hmm.
He had transitioned like in the 60s, and he was like almost 70 when I was going to him. And he'd kind of seen it all. And I asked him at one point, like, why do you think the focus is so much on trans women and not trans men? And like, well, I asked him, do you think that trans women have it harder than trans men? And he was like, oh, absolutely. And one of the reasons is that most trans men pass really well. Like, more so than women, I think, because if a guy can grow a beard, you're not going to ask any more questions. Uh, you see a guy with thinning hair and a beard, and no offense,
No.
but yeah, you know, you see a guy with those obvious masculine signifiers, and you don't really ask questions. And I think trans men, most of the time, trans men who have been on hormones for a while, don't get read very much, in my experience. Whereas it's a little harder for trans women because there aren't as many just that's an automatic signifier thing. So we do stand out more. I pass pretty much 100% of the time now, but for a lot of years that wasn't really true. And I think that's part of it, but I think another part of it is just the way culture codes gender.
Hmm.
You know, I'm not an academic. I am not an expert on this subject, except in that it's been part of my life experience for a very long time. But have you noticed that androgyny codes as masculine? Masculine is a sort of cultural default. Like,
Hmm.
if you see, well, let's talk about non-binary people for just a second, because that's
Sure.
instructive. My spouse is a they, them, and has long hair and dresses in a way that we would consider androgynous, you know, jeans and t-shirts. They even wear like feminine cuts of jeans. But that's just how like a lot of guys dress. It's a sort of cultural default. And if you're assigned female at birth and you're non-binary and you dress that way, it reads as androgynous. Whereas if you're assigned male at birth and you wear a dress, a lot of people read that as hyper,
Feminine.
yeah, or for lack of a better word, sexualized.
Oh, okay.
Like it's an assigned female at birth person in male clothes just seems kind of not gendered at all. Whereas an obviously assigned male at birth person wearing female clothes is a cultural statement and it gets people mad. We have a weird relationship with masculinity as a culture. And I think that the idea of somebody born male dressing as female reads as weird and transgressive and sexualized. I hate that word, but
Hmm.
I don't have another word for it in a way that the opposite doesn't. And so I think people just feel more threatened by us because of the stupid relationship we have with masculinity. Femininity is different. It almost is just coded as an absence of masculinity. I feel like an academic could discuss this much more intelligently than me, but those are kind of my thoughts about it.
Yeah.
Like my non-binary spouse is sometimes frustrated by the fact that like if you're assigned female at birth, reading as non-binary is pretty easy. You just cut your hair short, wear jeans and flannels and like call yourself Sky or something. And at least to me, a person who spends a lot of time around genderqueer people, that reads as non-binary. But if you're assigned male at birth, trying to read as genderless is so much harder because whose masculinity is the default. But if you start dressing femininely, that doesn't read as androgynous, it reads as provocative.
Hmm.
I don't even remember what the original question was. You just sort of got me going. Oh, it was about why culturally we
Yeah.
talk about trans women so much more than trans men. So yeah, the short answer is we're more visible and we have a messed up relationship culturally with masculine people wanting to claim femininity.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Like you said, I'm sure academics have papers that they could.
If you listen to TERFs talk, if you listen to the J.K. Rowlings of the world talk, they talk about how nobody could possibly actually want to be a woman. So assigned male at birth people who do must be doing so for some nefarious and possibly perverted reason. Whereas women who want to be men, they talk about it like they're just lesbians who have been led astray.
Hmm.
There's never the suggestion that there's anything sinister about it. And I think that says a lot about how we view gender.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when it comes from women.
Yeah.
When
Oh,
they say, why would anybody want to be a woman? And you're like, so you
like
don't?
I know. Well, like Rowling in particular, not to pick on her, but she deserves to be picked on.
Yeah.
But she has said stuff like, if transitioning had been an option for me when I was young, I might have taken it because being a woman is a miserable hell of an existence. And it's like, you're so close.
You're right there.
You're right
Just
there. That's
take that
what
last step.
take that last step. Like, yeah, it maybe I don't want to speak for your inner demons here, Joanne, but if being a particular gender is a hell for you, that says something about you. Because that's what it was like for me. It's what it's like for most trans people because otherwise we wouldn't need to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Like I only became happy after I was able to be the gender I wanted to be. You're so close to getting that, but you just refuse to take that last step,
Yeah.
Joanne. Speaking to you, author to author.
Well, she's a regular listener.
Hi, Joanne. Go
No,
jump off a bridge, please. You can include that or not.
Well, at the very least, my Patreons will get to hear it. They get the unedited version, and sometimes I decide whether or not to cut certain bits.
I'm an American, so you can't prosecute me and you can't sue me under British libel laws.
Yeah. Now, Ozzy came out as non-binary in one of the
Hmm.
recent strips you did. And in the strip, Ozzy says basically, I always was, but you never asked.
Yeah.
Was that true for you? Did you think of that in the early days of the strip and it just was never canonized? Or is that something you came up with recently?
It's basically always been true. Because Ozzy, especially after the first couple years, Ozzy is heavily based on my spouse, David.
Okay.
As is Max. Like the person I've based the most characters on is myself, but David is second. And that's something that David has always known. Like as we met when we were like 18 years old, and they have basically known that about themselves that whole time. When I first came out, David was like, I know this is hard for you, but at least like when you tell people what you are, they know what that is. And this is before non-binariness was part of the conversation at all. We didn't even really have the word. They used to use the
Right.
word
Yeah.
they used to use the word androgynous to describe themselves, but they were always very clear. They really just didn't identify with the concept of gender at all. And that was something that was obviously deep inside them, and it's something that they've known pretty much as long as they've been around.
Mm-hmm.
Very much the same as like I had a sense that male wasn't my correct gender from the time I was really young, and David had a version of that, but for not identifying with gender at all in the first place. And so that was something I always knew about Ozzy, but Ozzy has also kind of the same attitude toward it that David usually has, which is I want to be comfortable with myself and I care like if the people who matter to me understand me. But as far as the rest of the world goes, David really doesn't care, which is very different than me. I wanted to shout, I am a woman from the highest rooftop. David doesn't care as much about that. David basically was able to come out and express more of that about themselves, partly because I did. Like I kind of went first, but then, I'd kind of cut the path through that wilderness. Plus, non-binariness got a little more cultural recognition, and so they were able to pursue that in ways that they couldn't before. And I think they're much happier for it. But mostly that's personal for them.
Yeah.
It was about being comfortable in their own identity, not so much about being seen by the whole world. And I just kind of project all of that onto Ozzy. How I understand Ozzy is how I understand David. And I just think it's really sweet to think of Ozzy. Ozzy would do anything for Milo. Like they're best friends, and Ozzy is a very loyal and almost selfless friend. Again, because David, who is my favorite person.
Nice.
And so yeah, that Ozzy has that attitude because David has that attitude, and it's always been there. I just didn't know it was going to come out. But if I were doing Ozzy and Millie now, like if I were just starting it now,
Hmm.
Ozzy would be canonically agender from the start. And I kind of use agender and non-binary interchangeably, even though they're not synonyms, just because David says both.
Okay.
I have a non-binary friend, so I get to say that.
And, you know, I always want to use the right terminology myself. You know,
Yeah.
if I ever say anything that you know is wrong or inadvertently offensive, please feel free to correct me. And
If I ever do that, I will do so as politely as possible because believe me, trans people know when it's an honest mistake and when it's malicious. We're very attuned to that. I think I do. I can speak for most of us there. Like we know the difference between someone just doesn't know the term or doesn't know you that well, so they don't know all the details about you,
hmm
versus when somebody's being hostile. They're very different experiences. And so most of us have no problem being like, oh, actually, their pronoun is this. And like it's I know sometimes cis people are afraid that like they'll say the wrong thing and it'll be a whole thing. And usually we can tell if you're doing your best and we're not going to be mad. I'm saying this for all the allies out there who maybe worry about that. We really do understand when you're doing the best you can do, and we appreciate it.
Yeah. I have a friend who's in my D&D group, and she was a coworker of mine for a while, but I met her before she had transitioned, and so every now and then I still refer to her
Oh,
uh,
sure.
incorrectly,
Like my family took a couple years to really get it right, not because they didn't accept it, but because they've been calling me by those other pronouns for decades.
right.
Uh, the one who took the longest was my brother, not because he had any issues, but because he lived the furthest away, so he got the least practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of went through a similar experience myself in that when I was in college, I changed my name from David to Kurt.
Cool.
And so my parents had a very hard time accepting the new name for a long time.
Well, I usually don't dead name myself, but this story requires it. Uh,
Okay.
David was my dead name too.
Oh,
Uh, and it's also my spouse's name.
right. Yeah.
And so when I was freshly transitioned and my parents were still getting the hang of it, they would say that name and then immediately realize the mistake and pretend they were addressing my spouse. And like I could usually tell, but I just thought that was funny. Like, yeah, you're trying your best
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
have this convenient out, I'd probably take it too.
So, just a funny story about name changes. When I changed my name from David to Kurt, my friends who had known me as one, and so they started calling me. First, it was Dave Kurt Person, and then it
That's
became.
it's two-thirds of Nirvana.
Yeah, there you go. And then it became Daver Kurt. And then my best friend's dad was making the seating arrangements for my best friend's older brother's wedding. And so he was writing everyone's names, but he was doing initials. And so for me, he wrote D or K.
Oh my
And
God. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well,
So guess what my nickname was for a
I'm the
while?
dork, so I guess I sit here.
So yeah, for a long time, I with a certain group of friends, I was dork with a capital K.
When people heard my new name, I got so many there is no Dana, there is only Zool jokes.
Mm, yeah,
And
yeah.
I was a Ghostbusters fan as a kid because it was the 80s. So
Oh
I
yeah,
like
tell me about it.
I thought that was fun the first 50 times.
Right, yeah.
About my name, though, if we're going to talk about names,
Sure.
it
Yeah.
was Dana Claire was my mother's work.
Oh.
The day that I came out to her, we had a long conversation about names. And I
Mm-hmm.
waited until I could tell her in person. So we went for a long walk and we talked about it. And by the end of it, she was like, "Have you thought about names?" I was like, "Yeah, I've got a few I'm considering." And she was like, "You know what? I think you should preserve your initials." Because I had done a lot of my work as DC Simpson prior to that.
Right. Yeah.
And she was like, "If that's still your name, it's going to be a lot easier." And I was like, "That's true, isn't it?" For some reason, I hadn't considered that. And so we talked about it, and she was like, she said, "I like Dana for you." And that wasn't on my list. But it was like, one, that's a good name. I can imagine being called that. And two, it feels so right that it comes from mom.
Yeah.
And Claire is the closest we could get to feminizing my original middle name, which was not a name with an obvious feminine equivalent, but it's at least the same length and has the same first letter.
Okay.
So it's my mom got to name me the second time too, which seemed only appropriate since she picked my name the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to go along with it, but she chose well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. You seem like a Dana to me.
Yeah, I feel like a Dana. I think of some of the names I was considering before that, and it's like maybe it's just that everyone's been calling me Dana for 20 years, but I feel like that was better than any of the ones I was considering before that.
Right.
So good work, Mom. It's like you
Well
know me
done.
or something. I mean, that was a magical conversation, though. Like my mom's good.
That's great that you had a supportive family throughout that whole
Yeah,
process.
my mom was very like, "Ooh, you're a daughter. How can I help?" And my dad was like, "Great. Oh, you're a girl. Okay. Do I have to do anything? Great. I'll be out in the yard." Like for him, it was just sort of like, "Okay, you're my daughter now. Whatever. I'm gonna go water my roses."
Right. But that's supportive in its own way.
It is. There was a moment early on when we were at we were out at dinner for my grandfather's birthday. And my dad was a dentist before he retired. And one of his patients came by the table and he was like, "These are my kids. This is Dana and Jerrianne and Scott." And she was like, "Oh, I thought you had two boys and a girl." And my dad, without pausing or anything, just goes, "No, I have two girls and a boy." And this is really early on. And like, it was one of my first times going anywhere with my family post transition. And
Hmm.
like she left after that conversation. I was like, "Dad, that was awesome." And he was like, "What? It's true." Like to him,
Yeah.
just kind of a mundane fact about me. And that's like the best reaction as far as dad reactions go.
Yeah. Do you think he suspected before you came
I
out?
have no idea what he suspected. I never know what that guy's thinking. Like my dad, I like my dad, but we're very different.
Right.
I'm much more like my mom in terms of how I think, so I don't know what he knew. I think he knew I think he knew something was up with me that he didn't get. But the thing with my dad is that as soon as I turned 18 and left the house, he just didn't feel I was his problem anymore. Like,
Hmm.
okay, you're off to college. I'm done. Great. And like, I know a lot of people whose parents like feel some propriety over their identities, and he didn't at all. He was sort of happy to be done and to have me just be another adult he knew. And so when I was like, "I'm a girl now," I was like, "Okay, that changes nothing for me."
Right.
My brother figured it out before I told him
Okay.
because I'd started shaving my legs and painting my nails and stuff. And he asked my mom, like, is he becoming a girl? And my mom was like, yeah. And Scott was like, all right. Like, my brother doesn't care either.
Well, I really appreciate you taking all this time to talk with me.
Well, thank you. It's been a fun conversation. I hope I've
Yeah.
been interesting.
Oh, definitely. Very much so. I think we kind of covered this already, but is there anything you want to tease or plug specifically that's coming out in the next little bit?
Pretty much stuff people know about. Phoebe and her Unicorn Book 22, which is called Unicorn Secrets, is coming out in October. First Tuesday in October.
Okay.
Then expect many more of those, and expect me to come out with that graphic novel about myself sometime in the next year or two, because I'm actually close to being done with it finally.
Excellent.
And yeah, that's what I'm doing. We didn't talk at all about my failed so far quest to get an animated show made, but I have no news on that front. It's just something I'd like to see happen. It's been
Yeah.
offered twice and it's gone nowhere. Who knows? Hollywood is weird.
Yeah. Doing my research, I read basically that you'd worked with Nickelodeon for a little bit and then it kind of just
Yeah, for
fell
about a
by the
year.
wayside.
And yeah, and before that, Amazon Studios. And both times it was kind of an old Hollywood story, which is that one executive was a fan of the project, then that person leaves the company and the project is kind of orphaned. And
Yep.
the new people never dump you right away, but I've learned to recognize the signs that they don't really want to do this.
Yeah, I have heard that story many, many times.
I know enough Hollywood people to know it's an old story. Plus, it's happened to me twice now.
Two nickels.
Yeah, it's weird that it happened
It happened
twice.
twice. Thank you again to Dana Simpson for taking the time to talk with me. A quick reminder that the full interview is available right now without any edits at patreon.com/welcome to Geektown. It's just $1 per month to get uncut audio from my interviews like this one, in addition to a monthly shoutout and outtakes and scripts of the previous written episodes I did based on listener questions. If you'd like a free way to help the show out, leaving a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or other podcast site is always appreciated. Either way, as long as you continue to listen, we'll always say,
Welcome to Geektown. Population, us.
questions for the Welcome to Geektown interviews are written by me, Kurt Onstead. I also host, edit, and produce the podcast. Theme song was written by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santel.